Modern art usually depicts Jesus as a peaceful figure in soft light. The reality of his life was grounded in a brutal Roman military occupation. A common Galilean in the first century lived on the absolute edge of survival. They faced rampant dysentery and malaria, experienced widespread poverty, and crushing taxation designed specifically to feed the Roman war machine. To explain this endless suffering, the religious establishment leaned on a theology of a severe God. They framed the divine as a strict father punishing a disobedient population. John the Baptist took this theology to its extreme in the desert. He warned of an impending apocalyptic wrath, preaching that an axe was already positioned to cut down fruitless trees. The Pharisees took a different approach. Core biblical commandments branched out into an overwhelming web of secondary rules. Their solution to Roman oppression was a hyper-strict adherence. Earning salvation required microscopic compliance, as the Sabbath command expanded into 39 distinct, forbidden categories of labor. First-century Judea was a theological powder keg. The general population was starving for spiritual comfort, yet the prevailing system only offered a severe, demanding, and loveless authority figure. Jesus left the daily grind of his carpentry work in Nazareth and walked directly into the desolate, unforgiving Judean wilderness to be baptized by John. The cliffside caves of this exact region housed the Essenes, an extremist sect who completely withdrew from society to prepare for holy war. The archaeological evidence of their settlement includes the Dead Sea Scrolls. These texts outline the sect's specific, violent strategy to reclaim Jerusalem by force, literally mapping out a final war of the sons of light against the sons of darkness. Jesus spent 40 days in this desert and ultimately rejected their militaristic path. He recognized that organizing an earthly rebellion lacked the deep compassion his people actually required. Novelist Shusaku Endo points out a profound theological perspective here. He argues Jesus shifted God's image from a stern father to a tender-hearted mother. Instead of a distant judge, this maternal perspective presented a divine presence that shared human exhaustion, suffered alongside the weak, and offered comfort over punishment. This new perspective directly collided with the old establishment over the observance of the Sabbath. Walking through a golden field, the disciples casually snapped off a few heads of grain for a quick snack. The Pharisees reacted with immediate outrage. In their intricate legal web, picking a single kernel was classified as the specific crime of harvesting a crop. The establishment viewed the Sabbath as an onerous test of absolute obedience. Jesus saw their extreme, expanding rules as petty and actively harmful to an already exhausted population. He repeatedly healed people on this specific day, declaring that the law was made to benefit humans, rather than humans existing to serve the law. Stripping away the weaponized legalism of the Pharisees, he restored God's law as a compassionate gift, actively dismantling the foundational logic of the religious elite. Jesus' teaching posed a fatal political threat to every established faction in Judea. Rejecting the militant rebellion of the Essenes and the strict legalism of the Pharisees left him alienated from all earthly power, leading directly to his execution. 4 decades later, the geopolitical tensions boiled over. The apocalyptic war the Essenes had prepared for actually erupted against Rome. Roman legions completely flattened Jerusalem and burned the Second Temple. The Sadducees and the militant zealots who relied on the temple system vanished completely from history. This timeline begins at the ruin of 70 CE. From the ashes, only 2 ideological groups survived the Roman purge. The Pharisees created rabbinic Judaism, while the followers of Jesus evolved into early Christianity, growing in parallel to shape Western civilization. The historical Jesus did more than spark a new religion. He introduced the idea that the ultimate power in the universe is not a dictator demanding compliance, but a presence suffering alongside us. When we picture the crucifixion, specific images immediately come to mind: a hesitant Roman governor weighing a verdict, a condemned man dragging a massive wooden cross through the streets, and a final execution carried out with iron nails driven through the hands and feet. Much of this imagery is shaped by medieval European tradition and the specific narrative structure of the canonical Gospels. Those texts functioned as ancient biographies, works written primarily to reveal a subject's moral character and theological significance.
rather than serving as a strict forensic or historical report. But in 1968, excavations in a Jerusalem suburb uncovered a tomb that shifted the focus from text to physical evidence. What the dirt revealed was a process that was grittier, deeply political, and structurally different from the sanitized icons of classical art. Consider Pontius Pilate. While often portrayed as a reluctant judge, historical accounts from his own era describe an inflexible operator with a habit of executing men without trial. Physical evidence of his presence exists in this limestone block, discovered at Caesarea Maritima in 1961. The carving explicitly identifies him as the prefect of Judea. Pilate used his position to push Roman presence. He custom-minted these bronze coins using Roman cult items, symbols that would have been highly visible and controversial in a Jewish province. Tradition long placed Jesus' trial at the Antonia Fortress, a barracks overlooking the temple. However, Roman governors visiting Jerusalem typically stayed at Herod's palace, located on the city's western hill. This stone courtyard matches descriptions of the Praetorium, the specific location where Roman judgments and scourgings were legally carried out. Placing the trial in this courtyard changes the optics of the event. It becomes a public display of Roman legal power conducted from the seat of former Jewish kings. This location also challenges the geography of the Via Dolorosa, the 14-station path that modern pilgrims retrace through the Old City. This specific route is not ancient. It was actually established by Franciscan monks during the Middle Ages. For centuries before the Franciscans, the official pilgrimage route actually ran in the exact opposite direction of the modern path. If the trial began at Herod's palace on the Western Hill, it creates a more direct path toward the execution site outside the city walls. The logistics of that walk also differ from the classic paintings. The condemned rarely carried a fully assembled cross. Because wood was scarce in first-century Jerusalem, vertical poles were left permanently in the ground at the execution site. Victims only carried the horizontal crossbeam. This was a standardized procedure, a logistical system designed to recycle scarce timber for repeated use. We can see the mechanics of that system in the only known forensic evidence of crucifixion, the remains of a man discovered in a Jerusalem tomb in 1968. This is a calcaneum, or heel bone. You can see the original iron nail still piercing the fragment. The nail is only 4.5 inches long. It is physically too short to have pierced both feet stacked together. Instead, the nail entered the side of the heel, meaning the victim's legs straddled the vertical post rather than resting in front of it. Analysis of the arm bones showed no trauma, indicating the victim's arms were likely tied to the crossbeam with ropes rather than nailed. The fatal mechanism was not blood loss. As the body hung suspended, the weight placed extreme strain on the chest muscles and diaphragm, leading to a slow process of asphyxiation. Steady crucifixion was engineered to induce prolonged respiratory suffering, a public display intended to act as a deterrent. Realizing the Via Dolorosa is a medieval invention, or that the mechanics of the cross were logistical, strips away centuries of artistic gloss. Removing that pageantry leaves the unvarnished mechanics of first-century execution in a contested territory. The standardized use of short nails and the permanent vertical poles show a system designed for logistical repetition and state control. Replacing these myths with material evidence doesn't erase history, it roots the world's most famous execution in a harsh forensic reality.